Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today.
Hello and welcome. My guest this month is one of the key directors of his generation, from his early work at new writing company Nabokov to his directorship in residence at the Old Vic. He has gone on to lead two of the UK's most prestigious theatres, the present one being my hometown theatre, the Birmingham Rep. Welcome, Joe Murphy.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much. It's an incredibly generous introduction. I'm not sure I claim to be one of the key directors of my generation, but how amazing to be said that.
Well, you're very welcome to it, and it's a real pleasure to have you as a guest, Joe. I'll say I've said it privately to you, but I'll say it on this episode. Many congratulations on your new post as artistic director of a theatre that is very, very close to my heart. Obviously, my formative theatre experiences were at the Red, and I hold it dearly, and I think they've made a brilliant choice. But we'll come to the Red a bit later on, if that's okay. What I tend to do, Joe, at the start with my guests, I try to take them back to their very first or very early theatre or slash showbiz experiences and what that might have been, and indeed what effect it might have had on you. So could you remember something very early? Did you go with family, friends, or school or something?
Well, it's interesting. We can kind of go two ways with this because my actual proper earliest memories are of actually getting involved with theatre. And then I've got a slightly later, very strong memory of watching one. So where do you want to go to first?
I think I'd like to go. I'd like to go to both. We don't often have people with early experience of getting involved. So could we start with the getting involved and what that was?
Yeah, sure. There was a couple of things. I mean, I was very over imaginative as a child, combined with, in a sense, I think, slightly lonely. So I used to play in my own world a lot when I was young. But also then that was matched with a massive overactive imagination and a real hunger to kind of be sociable and talk to people all the time. So I think my parents were a bit like, where do we put all of this? What do we do? So they sent me off to like youth theatre and Amdram. So I kind of grew up all over the place. I was born in Dublin. I grew up just outside London, but this is when we got down to the south coast in Bournemouth. And they sent me along to really, I suppose, siphon off some of that extra imaginative energy that was pouring out of me and ultimately make friends, I think. It's sort of hard to have that perspective when I was that young, but I think ultimately in theatre, I've always been looking for a tribe. I haven't always fitted in, either at school or wherever. I've obviously, listeners can't see this, but I'm tall with big, vibrant red hair, which has become an asset in my later life. But as I'm sure we can all imagine, at school was not ideal. So I think it was like they were looking for friendships and socialization, and that is what theatre. My first experience of theatre is with my local youth theatre, and it's about tribe. And I think I just thought, oh my God, like a place where I belong, a place where everyone's imaginations are like mine, a place where I get to actually wrought my imagination in something real. So I started doing youth theatres, I think a lot of us did, but there was quite a big Amdram scene. And I'm obsessed with the Amdram scene, and I've got a real passion for it. And yeah, so I was interacting with a lot of adults actually, and a lot of people older, and it was just blowing my mind, all the different perspectives and ways of talking and ways of hanging out and ways of being friends and literature and comic books and all these different things that people were kind of pouring into me. So my sort of earliest experience is really about tribe and belonging, I
Well,
think.
it's fascinating you say that, Joe. And I was listening to a Desert Island Discs where a pal of mine was the guest, the brilliant Monica Dolan.
Oh,
And,
amazing.
it's a great episode, but she was talking similarly about belonging or finding that, again, going along to a youth theatre or whatever and feeling like, oh my God, I really belong. And I think people can really connect to that suddenly you do feel at home, in some ways. And also what I like about, particularly, making theatre or certainly as an actor when I'm acting and stuff, is often you can end up in rooms with people from really different backgrounds, totally different generations.
Yeah.
So I'm working or acting alongside people who are the same age as my kids, and I find that really refreshing and rewarding. It's really great, and because a lot of people in jobs tend to maybe progress and work with people of the same age as they are,
Mm, mm.
whereas I think theatre is such a mix of things. That's fascinating. So what about your first experience of seeing something that you remember?
So I must have seen things before this, but my real first vivid memory, I'm about 12 or 13, and it was at the Southampton Mayflower, which was kind of the big local theatre, although it was about an hour drive away from where I was. And my mum took me to see Les Mis, and I am Les Mis obsessed. I mean, it's sort of my sort of shameful secret as a sort of,
No.
well, it's less shameful, but like when you're an up and coming kind of theatre director, and it's like everything's got to be cutting edge, and really all you want to say is, "I love Les Mis." You could,
How old were you, Joe, when you went to cinema?
yeah, I'd have been 12, 13, maybe.
Okay.
But then so me and my mum have gone throughout my life, basically, through we just keep going back and watching it. And so there was something, I think just the high drama of it, the passion of it, the production values of it, just really imprinted. I'm a bit of a history geek. So this idea that history could be alive and contemporary, and the singing, like the singing taking itself seriously, I think, or like the singing being actual an opportunity for drama. I sort of, that kind of blew my mind as well, and yeah, so that really imprinted on me, and
I'm also intrigued that you and your mom have revisited that particular show
yeah,
at various
yeah.
points over the years. Do you have a particular favorite production that you've seen, or
Um, so I feel, I mean, in my head, it was the first production. I'm sure now, I'm sure that was just the 13-year-old. I love the London version. There was a new, I think it originated in Australia. They've sort of updated the production recently. And so when I also met my partner, our second date was to see Les Mis, because it came to Cardiff where we were living, and I was like, well, listen, if you want to get to know me, the best way is to come and watch Les Mis with me and understand my passions. Um, and
and that works, I hope.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
it did, and I think she actually really enjoyed it. So that was like a key little moment where we're like, is this gonna work?
No, no,
Um,
I think those things are important. I had a similar occurrence with my partner of many years now, where she was a very keen Pet Shop Boys fan, and I wasn't particularly into Pet Shop Boys, and they did a musical, and I remember taking her to that. I won't go any further with that anecdote, other than to say we've been together for a very long time. We're very happy. Anyway, so you get into theatre through the youth theatre, and that's presumably performing, acting.
Acting. So
Yeah.
up until I was about 18,
Oh, wow.
I wanted to be an actor. So
Okay.
I did loads of youth theatres around. I was in 2 or 3 local youth theatres, and then we had 2 or 3 Amdram companies. So and I was doing everything from like Oh What a Lovely War to
Wow.
pantomimes to
Yeah.
Importance of Being Earnest to I was one of the very first roles I was ever cast in was as Macduff's son in Macbeth. I got killed, but the knife was very cold on my neck, so I kept laughing just as I was trying to say, "He has killed me, mother." So rather, and anyway, so yeah, I really wanted to be an actor, and then I did this thing called Year Out Drama Company at Stratford upon Avon, where you basically do like a year. It's absolutely amazing thing, and you basically do a sort of test a year of drama school. It's like as if it was drama school to go, is this what I want? Is this full commitment what I want? And I loved it. And you go to Edinburgh and you do the Fringe, and it's a really mind blowing experience. But my tutor sat me down at the end. Was like, "Are you sure you want to be an actor? Because I'm not sure you're good enough for a profession," which sounds like really brutal, but it was actually very bracing and candid and honest. And to be totally honest, I was an actor because I hadn't thought of anything else really, or been introduced to anything else. Like when I was at school, film wasn't really an option because I'm incredibly old. So like cameras and stuff, they just weren't really around or available at school. I was at, state school. We just didn't have any of that stuff. But what you could do is push some tables aside and do a scene or a play or something. So my mind hadn't really been open to all the other amazing arts of the theatre, like directing or the technical arts or design or anything. So when she kind of posed that question to me and sort of said, well, maybe university rather than drama school would be a better option because you could explore the wider landscape of theatre and feed your brain in different ways. So I went to Exeter University and ended up specializing in directing. Um, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was a particularly good director, but I was certainly not a good actor. So that really opened my mind, and the joy I've got from directing sort of surpassed anything I'd got from acting. So I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Well, before we then go into your professional career as a director, I have to ask this: do you ever have any regrets that you didn't act professionally, or is that long since gone now?
No, I don't at all. I don't actually. I never did actually. Weirdly, as soon as she said that, something clicked in my mind, and I was like, "Oh yeah." Like I do enjoy talking about plays more than I enjoy being in plays. I do enjoy thinking about the world of the play or the meaning of the show more than I necessarily. I know I love the adrenaline rush of being on stage, but actually, and I'm in awe of actors. Like I just when an actor can articulate that inner life of a character in a way I just never could. I get such a pleasure from being near that bit of the process and watching them do that. I'm ultimately a show off, probably. So I miss that bit. I miss being applauded, I think. But other than that,
Uh,
no.
Other than that, I so obviously you presumably spend a lot of your time at university directing whenever you can, and then did you then do a different separate directing training,
I
or
did,
how
yeah,
did that?
exactly. So I specialised in directing at university, and then I did Edinburgh in the 3 years I was at university and all the extracurricular shows. And then I did an MA in directing at Mount View, um, which is really fascinating. And was this big moment where I went, oh my God, like you've got to earn a living and like there's a profession. And like up to that point, it's just like, aren't these plays cool? And isn't it really interesting to think about these things? And then Mount View is a massive wake up call of going, there's an industry and there's a way it works and there's a way of getting jobs and there's a way, how is this a profession, not just a passion or an academic exercise? And then I came out of drama school and I had sort of no money and I was living in London and someone just said, oh, I'll give you 50 quid for a day if you'll help me move. Somebody needs some furniture moving. And I was like, oh, great. Yeah, brilliant. I'll do whatever. Anyway, it turns out this furniture I was moving was for Josie Rourke, who was just becoming artistic director of the Bush Theatre at that time. And I was moving her into a flat opposite the Bush. And it was her technical manager or something who wanted help. So I just sort of said, oh, I've just graduated as a director. Could I have a job, please? And Josie, to her incredible credit, gave me a job.
How fortuitous that you were a removal man on that
I
particular
know.
job. It could have been something totally different. How so? You embark on this. I assume assisting.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
First of all, obviously at the Bush, and then beyond that, and obviously you and I met when you were assisting Jeremy at the Globe on Much Ado.
That's right.
I'm quite curious, and people, who maybe don't know much about the world of theatre. What would you say the key skills of a good assistant director are? Having done that yourself, what do you think the main things you need to have?
That is a really interesting question. Um, what I found was that very quickly you realize you're the only person in the room who isn't under pressure or being judged. Like everybody else in the room has to deliver a thing publicly that will be commented on and torn apart and celebrated and all the things in between. So I think what I found quite quickly was that it's not about me. That was the biggest thing I found as assistant director. Actually, it, what use can you be? That is the question I kept asking myself, and that kind of varies from with Jeremy, who you mentioned there, who I was his associate for about 6 years. And sometimes Jeremy needed quite intense, high-end conversations about large conceptual things within the play. And sometimes he needed scripts just sorted out. Like logistically, I just had to sort a script out and get it printed, or I'd have to talk to a writer, or I could just get some of the actors sorted on their entrance and exit. So the skills you need vary kind of wildly from kind of large conceptual things to real logistical understanding of how theatre works, how the cast interact with stage management, how does that interact with design, what are the practicalities, and how can you make all of that a lot easier. But the biggest lesson I think for assistant directors is not about you or your ideas, actually, for that moment in time. And that is a real blessing because you get to make all your mistakes, you get to learn from incredible people around you, you get to absorb knowledge. So I think often as assistant directors, we feel like we need to be in output mode, constantly proving our worth and why we're there and that we're ready for a show and we can work with actors, which was certainly my initial instinct. But then you learn actually we should be on absorb, on input mode. It's a real privilege to be anonymous. It's a real privilege to be in a process where actually your work isn't being judged. And so it can be about everybody else and you're there to make it better. I'll just tell a very quick anecdote about that. So I interviewed with the great James McDonald, probably one of the most defining directors. Oh my God, just incredible. And I remember it was at the Royal Court really early on. I'd only just graduated. And I had an interview with Jeremy Herrin and I interviewed with James McDonald. And James McDonald asked me what I thought about the play. And I launched into this like incredibly pompous, young person knows it all kind of monologue about the play. And then at the end, James just kind of nodded at me and then went, I like a lot of silence in my rehearsal room. It's like his response. And I was like, cool. So I'm not going to get this job. But there was something about that perspective that I thought was really interesting. The idea that actually directing can be silence, knowledge can be quiet. I just thought that was really interesting. And so in a weird way, the rejections often lead to the most interesting learnings or improvement. And I didn't get the job with Jeremy either. And then he rang me later for another job, and then that started a 6-year relationship. So I think the other thing I would just say about assistant directing and young directors is the rejection often leads to something more interesting. I think I almost never got a job I went up for in my first few years. I always got something afterwards. Like someone would go, oh, I remember we talked about, or, oh, we connected on and you weren't right for that, but how about this? So the idea that you never know who you're in the room with, you never know where the paths are going to take you and where that might become important or relevant.
That's a very interesting area you just touched on as well. And the being open to so many of those dynamics or relationships in a room. It's very amusing, the James McDonald things. Whenever I think of James, who I think is a wonderful director, and when I see him socially, he always seems very quiet as a person as well. So that's really, I always think he doesn't say very much, and he's so that does make me laugh. No, that's true. So presumably you're now in a position where you're recruiting and finding assistant directors. And does the same apply the other way around? What you've described the assistant director on, is that what you're kind of looking for, or does it depend on the play that you're working?
Yeah, I mean, you're always trying to match to the play, I suppose, and process. But ultimately, for me, assistant directors are about directors and theatre makers of the future. So I suppose what I'm looking for are people that we're really excited by, people that have real potential. I think also the world is so different now to when I was coming up, and the atomization of the world and the politicization of the world. And with that has become lots of complexities and lots of improvements. So I suppose also what we're looking when we're talking about assistant directors, of course, first and foremost, we're talking about artistic quality and potential, but we're also looking at, who is allowed to tell stories in theatre and who isn't, who's been left out in the cold and who hasn't. And with our assistant directors will, generally are going to go on to be the artistic directors of the future. So I suppose we feel a kind of artistic and moral obligation around that to say, who aren't we seeing? So sometimes it isn't always about an assistant job. Now, I'm not always thinking, oh, can they deliver understudy rehearsals? Can they, deliver the tour? Can they? Of course, they need to do those things. But I also think structurally, who is being left out of theatre? Who isn't? Who's being told at the young age when I was allowed to join youth theatres and I was being empowered and told that this culture belongs to me? Who's being told it doesn't? Who's being disconnected from that? Who's being alienated from that? And can we use assistant roles, if we slightly pivot what they're needed for, what they do, as entry points, as connection points, as ways into the theatre, for people who theatre structurally leaves out, I suppose. So
that's very interesting, and I totally agree as well. And in a way, it brings us nicely to the notion of your journey towards leadership, I suppose, whatever that might mean, whatever form that takes. For me, running a company, of course, is inevitably a form of leadership or collaboration. How you look at it. So how did you become involved with Nabokov?
I feel like every story is a sort of litany of chaos and
no, it's
fluke
good.
chances.
I like your journey. It's good.
But I think that is, to me, that is just what this industry is. So I was at the Bush. So I did a sort of year on and off at the Bush from Josie Rourke incredibly giving me that first opportunity. So my first opportunity was working on a Mike Bartlett monologue. So like instantly, I was just my mind was blown. Um, and then the sort of towards the end of that year, I worked on 2nd of May 1997 by Jack Thorne. So I was probably, I don't know, a year out of drama school at this point, or just coming up to my first year out. And George Perrin was directing it, and Nabokov were co-producing it with the Bush. And the Bush was my like church at this point. It was all Bush all the time. It blew my mind. And it was like the play is like three two-handers almost through the night of the 2nd of May election. So you're in the evening with an older Tory couple, then you're in the middle of the night with a kind of early 20s Lib Dem couple, and then you're in the new dawn with a sort of 18-year-old, two Labour mates. And because of that, I just had quite a lot of opportunity to work on scenes, because naturally, George, you can only work on one of those at a time, and then what do you do with the other actors? So I just had more opportunity, I suppose, to be working and showing George what I could do than you might normally have on a play. And then George and James Grieve, who were running Nabokov, got the Payne's Plough job. So incredibly fortuitously, they sort of sat me down and said, would I be interested in the Nabokov job? And I was like, absolutely. And I think one of my strengths is that I've always presented more confident and more capable than I am or feel. So I was like, absolutely, yeah, top. I'm really up for it. And we talked about what it could be, and we were project by funded at that point. So it wasn't, it wasn't like an MPO or any kind of, that kind of investment level. But I don't know to this day. I've never quite had the courage to ask them. I hadn't directed anything at that point professionally, like not a thing. And so I don't know if they knew that, because when they introduced me to the exec director and we started talking, and it sort of became quite a I've never directed professionally. The exec director who'd been with George and James, who are two incredibly successful and experienced directors at this point, were a bit like, oh my God, what on earth is happening? And then some of our funders were like, oh my God, what on earth is happening? Nobody knows who you are. And so it was really terrifying and chaotic for a point. And we looked like we'd be losing some funding. And did I know what I was doing? But luckily in all of this, Jack Thorne, who I just worked with on 2nd of May, wrote me a one-person show as my first show. And it was a play called Bunny that the incredible Rosie Wyatt was in, and we did Edinburgh and we won a Fringe first, and then we did London and New York, and we toured, and it was kind of it was really brilliant. But that was really down to luck in Jack being so amazing and Rosie being so amazing, but also I'd met Lindsay Turner, another obviously kind of giant of the industry, and she said right at the beginning, similar to what we were talking about earlier, she said, right now you're anonymous, don't rush to like get rid of that. Like, this is the moment. Make all of the mistakes now. Just direct everything you can. Don't be pressuring yourself to be in at the Royal Court or to be directing at the Bush. And because of that, I made tons of mistakes. So Bunny, that was my first full professional show. I directed loads of scratch nights. I just directed anything I could in any scale and anywhere. So Bunny was by no means perfect, but I just made loads of mistakes by the time I got to Bunny. So it looked like I'd sort of launched with the first show, and it was kind of one of those overnight success energies, but like it completely wasn't. I just had amazing mentors in Jeremy and James and Georgia and Lindsay's amazing advice. So I really took that to heart. Don't rush. And so it'd been 2 or 3 years out of drama school before I directed that first show. But actually, those 2 or 3 years are some of the most valuable. But I find a lot of my contemporaries and a lot of young directors I talk to now are like, I want to direct now. I want to do the show now. And actually, that can do yourself a disservice. And actually, holding your nerve can be a good thing, I think.
It's interesting what you say there as well, because, do anything, make anything, seize an opportunity, all those things you're talking about. But I also think as one continues to make work further down the line, and being 30 odd years with Tom Elliott and still making stuff, I think it becomes even more important. And it's hard, I think, in the world we're in, but it becomes even more important to take risks. And I mean genuine risks, because everything about it says, don't take risks. We don't live in a risky environment. We don't want that risk. And it becomes even more important to go, no, we're going to do continue to do.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing in what they're saying. So we're going to come almost up to date in a second, but I'm curious because, of course, you very successfully ran the wonderful Sherman Theatre, and you're now at the brilliant Birmingham Rep. At what point did you feel you were interested in running a building and all that entails?
It's just always in my career since I knew that was a thing you could do. So I suppose it's probably Mountview Drama School as I started to understand the sort of professional landscape. I was like, I want to run buildings, and I think really that is my journey from wanting a tribe and wanting belonging to that's really what running a building is about to me. It's just sort of people are paid to be your tribe. It's like great. Not joking, obviously, but it's like you're sort of gathering a group of people together. You're trying to unite them in a single idea and a single endeavor, and then you're going to spend your energy, your hours, your days, your weeks, your years attempting to achieve that for an audience. And to me, that is just the most fulfilling um possible experience for me. So I'd wanted to run from the beginning.
Well, it's kind of a brilliant, to come from where we started, where you talked about finding a tribe and then, that sense of almost the same thing from that
100%.
boy on the South Coast in those Amtram and whatever.
Yeah.
And then to flagship organizations. And of course, this is also something that I'm always in awe of, when I've worked with a lot of directors who run buildings, and I was chatting to on this podcast to Justin down at Chichester and
Oh, brilliant.
Bourne and stuff. And I'm always amazed how you guys manage to juggle all the things that you have to deal with, which are nothing to do with directing a play. I know you have a great team there at the Rec as well, and I've
Yeah,
worked
yeah.
with those people. So, but do you have to feign interest in the toilets and why they're not working, or do you delegate that, Joe? I'm intrigued.
So when I was at the Old Vic before I took over the Sherman as the associate there, and Matthew Orchis, when I got the Sherman job, we were working on a show together, and he walked in with a big smile on his face, and I said, "Oh, Matthew, are you proud for me?" And he went, "Yeah, of course, but really, you'll just now know all of the crap I have to deal with all day, every day." And I thought, "Oh, okay, cool. Yes, I mean, do you know what? Weirdly, I've never had to feign interest. I suppose my brain is very curious about how things work on any level. I've just always been really curious about that. And ultimately, I think every screw or bolt in a building is there to get work onto a stage. So if the loos don't work right, my audience either aren't going to come or they're not going to be able to engage with the show. Like they're either going to go, well, that's not a building I want to go to, or they're distracted. So I suppose in a way, I've always been fascinated by that. And I've always been fascinated by where does an audience experience start? Like as a building, ultimately, I'm trying to curate theatrical experiences for my audience. Now, I suppose the very fringes of that would be a digital experience, online or website or whatever. But to me, really, 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 it's the moment they come through our doors. And I've got to curate an artistic experience from the way they get their drinks at the bar, to they go to the loo, to they watch the show, whatever it might be. So I suppose in my sort of lame, geeky mind, I've always been fascinated by how all of those things accumulate to the theatrical experience. And if you get one of them wrong, the whole thing doesn't work. So that's how I feel about it, I suppose.
Well, I am totally confident that the Rep is in brilliant hands. And even when you talked earlier about who gets to make theatre and who gets to tell stories and all of those things within a brilliantly diverse and creative city like Birmingham, the fact that you're consciously thinking about those things, I think is a really, really a reassuring sign for the building and its place in the wider culture of Birmingham. It's obviously I'm biased. I grew up there, but I think thriving cultural hub Birmingham.
100%.
The Rep is right at the heart of that. Joe, it's been really lovely chatting. I know you're busy, I'm sure, with lots of getting people through the door and make sure they have a good time. I always finish, Joe, with my guests by asking 7 random questions to which you
Nice.
just say the first response that you feel in that moment.
Great.
Here we go. A Welsh cake or a bacon bap?
Man, listen, I'm sorry to my Welsh people, but bacon bap, unfortunately.
Okay, well, that's a very Brummy thing, of course. Movies, Back to the Future or Back to the Future 2?
Back to the Future too.
Oh, wow. So
Uh,
a rare example of where you become, I suppose Godfather 2, people might go for that over the original, but I'm quite intrigued by that. King Arthur or Robin Hood?
Arthur, every time for me.
I know you've been to these cities, Moscow or St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg. It's amazing too.
Expressionism or naturalism?
Mm, probably naturalism, but the synthesis of
Uh,
both would be ideal, but probably naturalism.
and finally, Thomas Cromwell or Henry VIII?
Oh, Cromwell, every time.
Of
Come on.
course. Of course. Joe, I know we're going to see each other very soon anyway, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Have a good day.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Loved it.
Not at all. Cheers, Joe. Take care.
Thank you.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word